The North Atlantic, March 1943. The war beneath the waves had reached its most desperate phase. Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartmann stood in the control room of U-517, studying the decoded message that had just arrived from BDU, Befehlshaber der U-Boot, U-Boat Command Headquarters in Paris. His hands, steady despite 3 years of combat patrols, held the flimsy paper as if it contained his own death sentence. Convoy X-2229A, he read aloud to his executive officer. 87 merchant vessels, minimal escort. Position 52 degrees north, 35 degrees west. Course U-70, speed 8 knots. All available boats are to converge for attack. Oberleutnant Klaus Becker, who had survived 2 sinkings before joining U-517, looked up from the navigation table. 87 ships. That's larger than any convoy we've tracked this year. BDU confirms the count. British radio intercepts indicate a combined American-Canadian convoy carrying tanks, aircraft, and ammunition for the spring offensive. They're calling it the most valuable target of the war. Hartmann walked to the chart table where their position was marked in the mid-Atlantic, roughly 600 kilometers from the reported convoy location. Around them, throughout the vast expanse of the North Atlantic, 23 other U-boats were receiving identical messages. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, was assembling the largest Wolfpack concentration ever attempted. 24 submarines converging on a single massive convoy. Plot an intercept course. Hartmann ordered. Maximum sustainable speed. We have 36 hours to reach the attack position. What Captain Lieutenant Hartmann could not know, what none of the 24 U-boat commanders racing toward the coordinates could know, was that convoy HX-229A did not exist. There were no 87 merchant ships steaming across the North Atlantic. There were no tanks or aircraft or ammunition. There was only empty ocean, and waiting for the U-boats in that empty ocean was a trap more sophisticated than anything yet attempted in the Battle of the Atlantic. The ghost convoy was about to claim its first victims. 6 weeks earlier, in a nondescript building in London's Whitehall district, Commander Edward Travis of the Government Code and Cipher School sat across from Captain Roger Wynne, head of the Admiralty's submarine tracking room. Between them lay a proposal that would either revolutionize anti-submarine warfare or cost both men their careers. "Let me understand this correctly," Travis said, his voice carefully neutral. "You want to fabricate an entire convoy, not just false radio traffic, but a complete operational deception involving dozens of ships that don't exist, sailing routes they're not taking, carrying cargo that isn't there." "Yes," Wynne replied. "And I want to maintain this deception for at least 2 weeks, long enough to draw every available U-boat in the North Atlantic away from our actual convoys." Travis stood and walked to the window overlooking the Thames. Outside, London was recovering from another night of bombing, smoke still rising from fires in the East End. The war was in its 4th year, and Britain's survival still depended on the Atlantic lifeline. The convoys bringing food, fuel, and weapons from America. German U-boats were sinking ships faster than they could be replaced, and the Admiralty's projections suggested that Britain might be starved into submission before American industrial production could turn the tide. "The technical challenges are extraordinary," Travis said. "Would need to generate radio traffic consistent with 80 or 90 merchant ships, multiple escort vessels, convoy Commodore communications, distress signals, weather reports, all coordinated to create a believable pattern. Any inconsistency, any deviation from standard procedures, and the Germans will recognize it as deception. Bletchley Park has been reading German naval codes for 18 months. Wynne countered. "We know their procedures, their expectations, their analytical methods. We know what they're looking for, because we've been reading their assessments of our convoys. We can create something they'll believe because we understand how they think." Travis turned from the window. "And if they don't believe it? If they recognize the deception, they'll know we've broken their codes. Everything we've achieved at Bletchley Park, every advantage we've gained, would be compromised." which is why the deception must be perfect. Not just plausible, but indistinguishable from reality. The two men regarded each other in silence. What Wynne was proposing went far beyond the tactical deceptions that had been employed throughout the war. False radio transmissions, suggesting fleet movements, dummy installations attracting bomber raids. This would be strategic deception on an unprecedented scale, requiring coordination across multiple agencies, sustained over weeks, with the potential to draw the entire German U-boat fleet into a carefully prepared killing zone. You'd need approval from the Admiralty, from the Prime Minister's office, probably from the Americans as well, Travis said. The resources required: aircraft, destroyers, coordination with actual convoy operations, would be substantial. I've already spoken with Admiral Horton at Western Approach's command. He's prepared to allocate resources if the plan receives approval. The Americans are sending a liaison officer to discuss coordination. What I need from you is confirmation that Bletchley Park can generate the radio traffic necessary to make this believable. Travis returned to his desk and picked up the proposal, reading through the technical annexes that detailed the deception's structure. The plan called for creating a fictional convoy designated CHX 229A, supposedly sailing from Halifax to Liverpool with 87 merchant ships carrying military cargo. Radio operators would transmit routine convoy communications, position reports, weather observations, merchant ship chatter, all carefully crafted to match the patterns that German intelligence expected. The fictional convoy would be escorted by destroyers that were actually hunting U-boats drawn to the area, creating a trap where submarines expecting easy targets would instead encounter concentrated anti-submarine forces. It could work, Travis admitted. If we execute it perfectly, if the Germans don't suspect deception, if we can maintain the illusion long enough to draw significant U-boat forces away from actual convoys. But there are so many variables, so many points where this could fail. War is variables and failure points, Wynne said quietly. The question is whether the potential gain justifies the risk. Right now, we're losing the Battle of the Atlantic. German U-boats are sinking 6,000 tons of shipping per month. At this rate, we'll be unable to sustain operations in Europe by autumn. We need something that changes the equation, that forces the Germans to disperse their forces or concentrate them where we want them rather than where our actual convoys are vulnerable. Travis nodded slowly. I'll take this to the director. If he approves, Bletchley Park will commit the resources necessary. But Commander Wynne, understand this. If the Germans discover we've broken their codes, the intelligence advantage we've gained will disappear. We'll be back to fighting blind, and the cost in ships and lives will be catastrophic. I understand. But if we don't do something dramatic, we'll lose the Atlantic anyway. At least this gives us a chance. The approval came through on February 15, 1943. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, briefed on the proposal during his regular intelligence update, had grasped its potential immediately. Deception on this scale, he had said, could be worth a dozen convoy escorts. Proceed, but with absolute security. If this fails, I want no traces leading back to our intelligence capabilities. Planning began immediately in a secure facility beneath the Admiralty building. Commander Wynne assembled a team of specialists, radio operators who understood merchant ship communications, naval officers familiar with convoy procedures, intelligence analysts who had studied German U-boat tactics, and cryptographers from Bletchley Park who would ensure that the fictional radio traffic matched authentic patterns. The first challenge was creating a believable convoy composition. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, a WRS officer who had been tracking convoy movements for 2 years, compiled a list of fictional merchant ships drawn from vessels that had been sunk months earlier. Ships the Germans knew had existed, but whose loss might not have been confirmed. Each fictional vessel was assigned realistic cargo manifests, sailing characteristics, and radio call signs that matched Admiralty procedures. We need variation in the radio traffic. Mitchell explained during a planning session. Real convoys have ships with different radio operators, different transmission habits, different levels of discipline. Some captains maintain strict radio silence, others are chatty. We need to replicate that diversity or the Germans will notice the pattern is too uniform. Flight Lieutenant James Cooper, and RAF liaison officer, raised another concern. What about air cover? Real convoys receive reconnaissance flights, anti-submarine patrols. If we're claiming this convoy exists, we need to simulate those operations as well. We'll use actual aircraft. Wynne replied. Liberators and Sunderland's flying patrol patterns consistent with convoy escort, but positioned to intercept any U-boats that approach the fictional convoy location. The aircraft serve dual purposes. They make the deception more believable, and they're our first line of defense when U-boats arrive. The operational plan took shape over 3 weeks of intensive planning. The Ghost convoy would depart Halifax on March 5th, with radio traffic beginning that morning, simulating the assembly of merchant ships in Bedford Basin. Over the following days, transmissions would indicate the convoy forming up, departing through the submarine nets, and beginning its Atlantic crossing. The route would take the fictional convoy through the mid-Atlantic Gap, the area beyond the range of land-based aircraft where U-boats operated with relative impunity, exactly where German commanders would expect to find a vulnerable target. Radio operators practiced generating authentic sounding traffic. They studied recordings of actual merchant ship transmissions, learning the rhythm and patterns of convoy communications. Each operator was assigned specific fictional vessels and instructed to develop distinct personalities for their transmissions. One captain who reported weather conditions religiously, another who maintained minimal radio discipline, a third who constantly requested position updates. The Germans have been intercepting our convoy traffic for years, explained Commander Hugh Alexander, a cryptographer from Bletchley Park. They know what real convoys sound like. Our deception must be indistinguishable from authentic traffic, which means accepting that real convoys are imperfect. Mistakes, inconsistencies, minor violations of radio discipline. These make the deception more believable, not less. By early March, the team was ready. Radio operators were positioned at transmitting stations across Britain and Canada, ready to simulate a convoy crossing the Atlantic. RAF Coastal Command had allocated 12 Liberator bombers and 8 Sunderland flying boats for escort operations. The Royal Navy had positioned 6 destroyer groups in the mid-Atlantic, ostensibly on routine patrol, but actually positioned to intercept U-boats drawn to the Ghost convoy. On March 5, 1943, at 0800 hours local time, the first transmissions went out from Halifax. Radio operators began broadcasting routine convoy communications. Ships reporting ready for departure, the convoy commodore issuing sailing orders, escort vessels confirming positions. To anyone monitoring the traffic, including German intelligence stations in occupied France, it appeared that a large convoy was assembling for an Atlantic crossing. The Ghost convoy had begun its voyage. At U-boat headquarters in Paris, the intelligence section monitored Allied radio traffic around the clock. Corvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, chief of the operations staff, reviewed the morning's intercept summaries with particular interest. A large convoy assembling in Halifax was always significant. It suggested valuable cargo and presented a potential target for Wolfpack operations. Convoy X-229A, he read from the summary, estimated 70 to 90 vessels based on radio traffic volume. Departure scheduled for March 6th. Route likely through mid-Atlantic Gap. Admiral Toyoda, reviewing the same intelligence, saw opportunity. The U-boat fleet had been reinforced with new Type Thai boats, and several experienced commanders were currently operating in the North Atlantic. A convoy of this size, if intercepted in the mid-Atlantic Gap beyond the range of Allied air cover, could be devastated by a coordinated Wolfpack attack. How many boats can we position for intercept? Toyoda asked. 24 submarines are currently in the North Atlantic, Her Admiral. If we begin repositioning immediately, We can establish a patrol line across the convoy's likely route. Based on the convoy's reported speed and departure time, intercept should occur around March 12th. D-Nitz studied the chart showing U-boat positions scattered across the Atlantic. Concentrating 4 submarines against a single convoy would leave other areas vulnerable, but the potential payoff justified the risk. 80 or 90 merchant ships represented hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping, tanks, aircraft, ammunition that would never reach Britain. The strategic impact could be decisive. Issue orders to all boats in the North Atlantic. D-Nitz commanded. They are to form patrol line Robgraph and prepare for coordinated attack against HX 229A. This is priority 1. All other operations are secondary. Throughout March 6th and 7th, encrypted messages went out to U-boats scattered across the Atlantic. Captain Lieutenant Hartmann aboard U-517 received his orders while patrolling south of Iceland. Korvettenkapitän Siegfried von Forstner aboard U-42 broke off from shadowing a small coastal convoy to race toward the intercept position. Captain Lieutenant Horst von Schroeder aboard U-123 abandoned his patrol area west of Ireland and turned southwest toward the mid-Atlantic. 24 submarines, representing nearly a quarter of Germany's operational U-boat strength in the Atlantic, began converging on coordinates where they expected to find the largest convoy of the war. In London, Commander Wynne watched the intercepts with satisfaction. Bletchley Park was decoding German U-boat communications within hours of transmission, providing real-time intelligence on submarine movements. The trap was working. Boats were abandoning their patrol areas, leaving actual convoys unmolested, racing toward a target that existed only in radio transmissions and German expectations. "They're committing everything," Wynne said to Captain Horton, who had traveled from Western Approach's command to observe the operation. 24 boats. D-Nitz is betting heavily on this convoy, which means our actual convoys have a window. Horton replied. "How long can we maintain the deception?" "At least another week. The Ghost convoy is making 8 knots, consistent with a heavily loaded merchant formation. We're broadcasting position reports, weather observations, even simulating a straggler falling behind the main body. Everything the Germans expect to see." The radio operators maintaining the deception worked in shifts, generating hundreds of transmissions daily. Each message was carefully crafted to maintain the illusion. Routine position reports, merchant ships requesting course corrections, the convoy commodore issuing instructions about station keeping. Weather reports matched actual conditions in the mid-Atlantic. Radio discipline was imperfect, just as it would be in a real convoy where merchant captains varied in their adherence to communications protocols. German intelligence analysts, monitoring the traffic from their stations in France, found nothing suspicious. The volume of transmissions matched expectations for a convoy of 80-plus vessels. The content was consistent with standard Allied procedures. Individual ships exhibited the characteristic variations in radio discipline that marked authentic convoy operations. Every indicator suggested that HX 229A was exactly what it appeared to be: a large, valuable, and vulnerable convoy crossing the Atlantic. By March 10th, the first U-boats were approaching the intercept area. Captain Lieutenant Hartmann, having driven U-517 at maximum speed for 3 days, reached his assigned position in the patrol line. Around him, spaced at intervals of 15 kilometers, other U-boats were taking up stations. The patrol line stretched across 350 kilometers of ocean, a net designed to intercept the convoy regardless of minor variations in its course. "All boats report ready," Schnee informed Admiral D-Nitz at U-boat headquarters. "Patrol line Robgraph is established. Based on the convoy's last reported position and speed, contact should occur within the next 36 hours. D-Nitz reviewed the tactical situation with satisfaction. 24 U-boat positioned across the convoy's path, with orders to shadow the formation once contact was made, then launch coordinated night surface attacks. The tactics had proven devastatingly effective against previous convoys. Surfaced U-boats, attacking at night, when their low profiles made them nearly invisible, could penetrate escort screens and wreak havoc among merchant ships. Maintain patrol line until contact. DO, NITS ordered. Once the convoy is located, all boats are to report positions but hold attack until I give the order. We attacked together, overwhelming the escorts through concentration. The U-boats waited, diesel engines idling. Lookouts scanning the horizon for the smoke of 87 merchant ships. What the U-boat lookouts could not see, what their hydrophones could not detect, was that they were being hunted. 6 Royal Navy destroyer groups, positioned in a loose perimeter around the fictional convoy location, had been tracking U-boat movements through ultra-intelligence. The decrypted German communications that Bletchley Park was providing in near real time. The destroyers knew where each U-boat was stationed, knew they were waiting for a convoy that would never arrive, and were preparing to spring the trap. Commander Anthony Pugsley, commanding the destroyer HMS Hesperus, studied the plot showing U-boat positions. His destroyer group, 4 vessels equipped with the latest Type 144 sonar and Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars, was positioned 30 kilometers north of the patrol line, waiting for orders to attack. They're sitting ducks, his executive officer observed. Stationary, waiting for a convoy that doesn't exist. We could engage immediately. Not yet. Pugsley replied. Admiralty wants them concentrated, committed to the attack. If we strike too early, some boats will escape and NITS might realize it's a trap. We wait until they're fully engaged with the ghost convoy, until they've surfaced for attack and are most vulnerable. The waiting continued through March 11th. German U-boats maintained their patrol line, conserving fuel, listening for the sound of merchant ship propellers that would signal the convoy's approach. Radio operators aboard the submarines monitored Allied frequencies, hearing the continuing chatter of convoy communications, position reports, weather updates, the routine traffic of a large formation crossing the Atlantic. Aboard U-517, Capit, Lieutenant Hartmann felt the familiar tension of waiting for action. 3 years of combat patrols had taught him patience, but this operation felt different. The concentration of U-boats was unprecedented, the target extraordinarily valuable. If they succeeded, if they destroyed even half of the convoy, it would be remembered as one of the great naval victories of the war. Hydrophone contact. The sound operator reported suddenly. Multiple propeller signatures, bearing 075, range approximately 40 kilometers. Sounds consistent with merchant vessels. Hartmann felt his pulse quicken. Classification. Difficult to determine at this range, Herculon. But the number of contacts suggests a large formation. Could be the convoy. Throughout the patrol line, other U-boats were reporting similar contacts. The hydrophone operators, listening through their headsets to the sounds transmitted through water, were detecting what appeared to be dozens of ships approaching from the east. What they were actually hearing was a carefully orchestrated deception. 3 British submarines, positioned east of the patrol line, were broadcasting recorded sounds of merchant ship propellers through underwater speakers. The recordings, made during actual convoy operations, replicated the acoustic signature of a large formation. The throb of multiple propellers, the characteristic sounds of heavily loaded vessels moving through water. All boats report contact. Schnee informed Admiral D. NITS. Hydrophone bearings are consistent with convoy HX-229A approaching the patrol line. Estimated time to visual contact 2 hours. Excellent. D. NITS replied. All boats are to maintain position until visual confirmation, then shadow the convoy until nightfall. We attack after dark when the escorts are least effective. The U-boats waited as the hydrophone contacts grew stronger, the sounds of approaching ships becoming clearer. Lookouts strained to spot the smoke that would confirm visual contact. Torpedo crews prepared their weapons, checking firing solutions, ensuring that everything was ready for the attack. But the visual contact never came. The hydrophone sounds continued, seeming to indicate a large formation passing nearby, but no ships appeared on the horizon. Confused U-boat commanders reported the discrepancy to headquarters. Strong hydrophone contacts, but no visual confirmation, despite excellent visibility. At U-boat headquarters, Schnee studied the reports with growing concern. Something was wrong. The hydrophone contacts were consistent with a large convoy, but the absence of visual sighting despite clear weather was inexplicable. Either the convoy was further away than the hydrophone bearings suggested, or something else was generating the sounds. Could it be a deception? One of the intelligence officers suggested hesitantly. Schnee considered the possibility. Allied deception operations had been attempted before. False radio traffic, dummy installations. But nothing on this scale. Creating hydrophone contacts that mimicked an entire convoy would require sophisticated equipment and precise execution. It seemed unlikely, almost impossible. Continue tracking, Schnee ordered. If it's a deception, we'll know soon enough. If it's a real convoy, we can't afford to let it pass. But Admiral D. Nitz, reviewing the same reports, felt the first stirrings of doubt. He had been fighting the Battle of the Atlantic for 4 years, had learned to trust his instincts about when something felt wrong. The absence of visual contact, despite strong hydrophone signals, was anomalous. The radio traffic from the convoy had been consistent, but perhaps too consistent, lacking the occasional communications failures or equipment problems that characterized real convoy operations. Recall the boats. D. Nitz ordered abruptly. Something is wrong. This may be a trap. The order went out at 14:30 hours on March 11th. Encrypted messages directing all U-boats in patrol line Robgraph to break off contact and disperse to their original patrol areas. But the order came too late. The Royal Navy destroyers had been waiting for this moment. As soon as Ultra Intelligence confirmed that U-boats were concentrated and focused on the fictional convoy, Commander Pugsley received authorization to attack. HMS Hesperus increased speed to 25 knots, racing toward the nearest U-boat position. Her sonar operator had a solid contact. U-517, stationary at periscope depth, still trying to locate the convoy visually. The destroyer's Hedgehog mortar, a forward-throwing anti-submarine weapon that fired 24 contact-fused projectiles in an elliptical pattern, was ready to fire. Contact bearing 095, range funds 200 yards, the sonar operator reported. Target stationary, depth approximately 30 meters. Fire Hedgehog, Pugsley ordered. The mortar fired with a series of sharp cracks, 24 projectiles arcing through the air to splash into the water ahead of the destroyer. They sank rapidly, forming a pattern designed to bracket the submarine's position. Aboard U-517, Hartman heard the splashes and immediately understood what was happening. Emergency dive! All ahead full. But there was no time. The Hedgehog projectiles, sinking through the water at 40 feet per second, reached U-517 within seconds. 3 projectiles struck the submarine's pressure hull, their contact fuses detonating 35-pound Torpex warheads. The explosions tore through the control room and forward torpedo compartment, rupturing the pressure hull and flooding the submarine instantly. U-517 sank in less than a minute, taking Captain Lieutenant Hartman and his entire crew to the bottom of the Atlantic. Throughout the patrol line, similar attacks were underway. HMS Vanish engaged U-402, achieving a solid sonar contact and delivering a depth charge pattern that crushed the submarine's pressure hull. HMS Vedette caught U-123 on the surface, raking the submarine with gunfire before it could dive, killing the bridge watch and forcing the boat to surface again, where it was finished off with depth charges. The U-boats, concentrated in a relatively small area and focused on locating a convoy that didn't exist, found themselves under coordinated attack by destroyers that knew exactly where they were. The tactical situation, which had seemed so promising hours earlier, had become a nightmare. Submarines designed for hunting merchant ships were being hunted themselves by warships equipped with superior detection, equipment, and guided by intelligence the Germans didn't know had been compromised. Corvette and Captain von Forstner aboard U-653 managed to dive deep and evade the initial attacks, but his submarine was damaged by near missed depth charges that sprung hull plates and caused leaks in multiple compartments. Unable to surface for repairs and running low on battery power, he was forced to blow ballast and surrender when his boat surfaced hours later, surrounded by British destroyers. By nightfall on March 11th, 8 U-boats had been sunk and 3 more severely damaged. The surviving submarines scattered, abandoning the patrol line and fleeing at maximum speed towards safer waters. The concentrated wolf pack that Admiral Toyoda had assembled to attack convoy HX 229A had been decimated without firing a single torpedo at a merchant ship. At U-boat headquarters in Paris, the disaster unfolded through a series of increasingly desperate radio messages. Submarines reporting attacks, calling for help, transmitting final positions before disappearing beneath the waves. By midnight, Schnee had compiled a preliminary assessment, 11 boats lost or missing, representing nearly half the force that had been committed to the operation. Admiral Toyoda, reading the reports in his office, understood immediately what had happened. The convoy had been a deception, an elaborate trap designed to concentrate his U-boats, where Allied anti-submarine forces could destroy them. The implications were staggering. Not just the loss of 11 submarines and their crews, but the realization that Allied intelligence had been sophisticated enough to create a deception so convincing that his experienced commanders had been completely fooled. How did they do it? Schnee asked. The radio traffic, the hydrophone contacts, the coordination. It would require intelligence capabilities we didn't think they possessed. Toyoda didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the implications beyond this single operation. If the Allies could create fictional convoys convincing enough to draw his entire U-boat fleet into a trap, then every piece of intelligence he received was potentially suspect. Every convoy sighting, every radio intercept, every tactical assessment might be deception rather than reality. We've been outplayed, Toyoda said finally. They understood our tactics, anticipated our responses, and created something we couldn't distinguish from reality. The question now is how we adapt. The answer would reshape German U-boat strategy for the remainder of the war. Toyoda ordered immediate changes to operational procedures, increased skepticism about intelligence that seemed too convenient, requirements for visual confirmation before committing forces, dispersed patrol patterns that couldn't be easily targeted by concentrated anti-submarine operations. But the damage had been done. The loss of 11 U-boats in a single operation, combined with the psychological impact of realizing they had been deceived so completely, marked a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. In London, Commander Wynne received the battle damage assessments with quiet satisfaction. Operation Ghost Convoy had exceeded expectations. 11 U-boats confirmed sunk, 3 more damaged, and the entire German Wolfpack strategy disrupted. But more valuable than the material losses was the psychological impact. German U-boat command would now question every piece of intelligence, hesitate before committing forces, operate with a level of uncertainty that would reduce their effectiveness. The actual convoys made it through unmolested, Captain Horton reported. While the U-boats were concentrated around your ghost convoy, 3 real convoys crossed the Atlantic without losing a single ship. That's 240 merchant vessels carrying 500,000 tons of cargo, delivered safely because the Germans were hunting phantoms. Prime Minister Churchill, briefed on the operation's success, authorized a commendation for everyone involved. But he also ordered that the operation remain classified at the highest level. The techniques employed, the radio deception, the hydrophone simulation, the coordination with ultra-intelligence, were too valuable to risk exposure. This changes the equation in the Atlantic, Churchill told his war cabinet. We've demonstrated that intelligence and deception can be as effective as destroyers and aircraft. The Germans will never again be certain whether they're hunting real convoys or chasing ghosts. The technical teams that had created the deception began planning follow-up operations. Lieutenant Mitchell proposed a series of smaller ghost convoys, designed to keep German intelligence off balance and force U-boats to investigate every potential target. Flight Lieutenant Cooper suggested using the same techniques in other theaters. Phantom invasion fleets that would force the Germans to disperse their defenses. But Commander Wynne cautioned against overuse. Deception works because it's unexpected. If we employ it too frequently, the Germans will develop countermeasures. We need to use this capability sparingly, at critical moments when the strategic impact justifies the risk of exposure. The debate continued through the spring of 1943, as the Battle of the Atlantic entered its final phase. Allied anti-submarine capabilities were improving rapidly. More escort carriers, better radar, improved depth charges and ahead, throwing weapons like Hedgehog. The combination of superior technology, ultra-intelligence, and sophisticated deception operations was turning the tide decisively against the U-boats. German submarine losses climbed steadily through April and May. Admiral Toyoda, unable to determine which intelligence was reliable and which might be deception, became increasingly cautious about committing his forces. The aggressive Wolfpack tactics that had been so effective in 1941 and 1942 were abandoned in favor of dispersed operations that reduced vulnerability, but also reduced effectiveness. By June 1943, Allied shipping losses had dropped to levels not seen since the war's beginning. The crisis that had threatened Britain's survival just months earlier had been overcome through a combination of industrial production, technological innovation, intelligence superiority, and operational deception. The Ghost Convoy, that fictional formation of 87 merchant ships that had never existed, had played a crucial role in this transformation. Captain Lieutenant Heinrich M. Müller, one of the few U-boat commanders who had survived the Ghost Convoy operation, returned to port in late March aboard 338. His submarine had been on the periphery of the patrol line and had managed to escape when the British destroyers attacked. But the experience had shaken him profoundly. We were hunting something that wasn't there, he told the debriefing officers at U-boat headquarters. The radio traffic was perfect. The hydrophone contacts were convincing. Everything indicated a real convoy. But it was all fabricated, all designed to draw us into a killing zone. The debriefing officers pressed for details. How had the Allies created such convincing hydrophone contacts? How had they coordinated the deception across such a wide area? How had British destroyers known exactly where to find the U-boats? Müller had no answers, only questions. They knew where we were. The destroyers came straight to our positions. No searching, no uncertainty. It was as if they could see through the water, as if our every movement was being tracked. The debriefing report, forwarded to Admiral Toyoda, reinforced his growing suspicion that Allied intelligence capabilities exceeded anything German naval intelligence had anticipated. But he could not imagine the truth, that British cryptographers at Bletchley Park were reading German naval codes within hours of transmission, that every U-boat position report, every tactical order, every operational plan was being intercepted and decrypted. The security of German naval codes would not be seriously questioned until much later in the war, and by then it was too late. The intelligence advantage provided by Ultra, combined with deception operations like the Ghost Convoy, had given the Allies a decisive edge in the Battle of the Atlantic. The final assessment of Operation Ghost Convoy, compiled by the Admiralty in July 1943, documented both its immediate tactical success and its broader strategic impact. 11 U-boats sunk represented approximately 5% of Germany's total operational submarine force. 3 actual convoys had crossed the Atlantic unmolested, while German forces were concentrated around the fictional target, delivering critical supplies that supported Allied operations in North Africa and preparations for the invasion of Sicily. But the psychological and operational impacts were even more significant. German U-boat command had been forced to question the reliability of its intelligence, leading to more cautious and less effective tactics. The concentration of U-boats into large wolf packs, which had been the cornerstone of German strategy, was abandoned in favor of dispersed operations that reduced vulnerability, but also reduced the ability to overwhelm convoy escorts through coordinated attacks. The Ghost Convoy operation, the assessment concluded, demonstrated that sophisticated deception, properly executed and supported by superior intelligence, can achieve strategic effects disproportionate to the resources committed. The operation's success suggests that similar techniques could be employed in other theaters and against other targets, provided that operational security is maintained and deception is not overused to the point where enemy forces develop effective countermeasures. The techniques developed for the Ghost Convoy would be refined and employed throughout the remainder of the war. Operation Fortitude, the massive deception campaign that convinced German high command that the D-Day landings would occur at Pass de Calais rather than Normandy, employed similar principles on an even larger scale. Fictional armies, false radio traffic, and coordinated intelligence deception convinced the Germans to position their forces where Allied troops would not land, contributing significantly to the success of the Normandy invasion. But Operation Ghost Convoy remained unique in its focused intensity. A single fictional convoy that had drawn a quarter of Germany's U-boat fleet into a carefully prepared trap, sinking 11 submarines and fundamentally altering the tactical calculus of the Battle of the Atlantic. Commander Wynne, reflecting on the operation in his post-war memoir, published in 1952, emphasized the collaborative nature of its success. No single element, not the radio deception, not the hydrophone simulation, not the ultra-intelligence, not the destroyer attacks, would have been sufficient alone. It was the integration of multiple capabilities, each supporting the others, that made the operation effective. He also noted the ethical dimensions of deception operations. We were creating a fiction designed to draw enemy forces into a killing zone. The U-boat crews who died hunting our Ghost Convoy were following orders, doing their duty as they understood it. They died because we were better at deception than they were at detecting it. There's no glory in that, only the grim satisfaction of having done what was necessary to win a war. The German perspective on the Ghost Convoy operation emerged gradually in the post-war years as former U-boat officers published their memoirs and historians gained access to German naval archives. Admiral Du Nitz, in his memoir published in 1958, acknowledged the operation as a significant defeat, but maintained that German U-boat forces had been overwhelmed primarily by Allied material superiority rather than by deception. The loss of 11 boats in March 1943 was painful. D. Nitz wrote, but the larger problem was that we were facing an enemy with unlimited industrial capacity, improving technology, and intelligence capabilities we had not anticipated. The Ghost Convoy was a clever operation, but it was symptomatic of a broader intelligence failure on our part. We did not realize how thoroughly our communications had been compromised. This assessment, while accurate regarding Allied material and intelligence advantages, underestimated the specific impact of the Ghost Convoy operation. The psychological effect of the deception, the uncertainty it created about intelligence reliability, and the resulting changes to German tactical doctrine had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate loss of 11 submarines. The story of the Ghost Convoy resonates through naval history as a demonstration of how deception, properly employed, can achieve strategic effects disproportionate to the resources committed. A fictional convoy that never existed, maintained through radio transmissions and acoustic simulation, drew a quarter of Germany's U-boat fleet into a trap that cost 11 submarines and fundamentally altered the tactical dynamics of the Battle of the Atlantic. The operation succeeded because it exploited German expectations and procedures. U-boat command expected large convoys to cross the Atlantic, expected to intercept radio traffic from those convoys, expected hydrophone contacts to confirm convoy positions. The Ghost Convoy provided exactly what German intelligence expected to see, making it indistinguishable from reality until it was too late. the technical achievement of maintaining the deception for over a week, coordinating radio transmissions across multiple stations, generating convincing hydrophone contacts, and positioning anti-submarine forces to exploit the trap, represented operational sophistication that German naval intelligence had not anticipated. The success demonstrated that, in modern warfare, the ability to manipulate an enemy's perception of reality could be as valuable as superior weapons or greater numbers. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, who had helped create the fictional convoy composition, reflected on the operation in an interview conducted in the 1970s. "We were writing fiction, but fiction that had to be absolutely convincing because lives depended on it. Every detail had to be perfect. The ship names, the cargo manifests, the radio procedures, the timing of transmissions. One inconsistency, one detail that didn't match German expectations, and the whole deception would have collapsed. The radio operators, who had maintained the Ghost convoy's communications for over a week, generating hundreds of transmissions that simulated 87 merchant ships, received no public recognition for their work. The operation remained classified for decades, and even when details became public, the technical nature of the achievement made it difficult to explain to those without signals intelligence background. But among the community of intelligence professionals and naval historians who studied the Battle of the Atlantic, Operation Ghost Convoy was recognized as a watershed moment, the point where deception operations matured from tactical expedients into strategic capabilities that could influence the course of campaigns. March 1943 marked the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. Allied shipping losses, which had peaked in November 1942 at over 700,000 tons, began a steady decline. By May 1943, German U-boat losses exceeded the rate at which new submarines could be commissioned, forcing Admiral Toyoda to withdraw his forces from the North Atlantic convoy routes. The crisis that had threatened Britain's survival was over, replaced by Allied dominance that would last for the remainder of the war. Multiple factors contributed to this transformation: increased numbers of escort vessels, improved radar and sonar technology, the closing of the mid-Atlantic air gap through deployment of long-range aircraft, better tactics and training for escort groups, and the decisive intelligence advantage provided by ultra-decrypts of German naval communications. But Operation Ghost Convoy played a specific and significant role in this transformation. By drawing concentrated U-boat forces into a trap, the operation inflicted losses that Germany could not easily replace. By demonstrating Allied capability for sophisticated deception, it created uncertainty that made German commanders more cautious and less effective. By allowing actual convoys to cross the Atlantic unmolested, while U-boats hunted phantoms, it ensured that critical supplies reached Britain at a moment when those supplies were desperately needed. The Ghost Convoy that never existed had achieved what real convoys, defended by escorts and aircraft, sometimes struggled to accomplish. It had defeated a concentrated U-boat wolf pack without losing a single merchant ship, because there were no merchant ships to lose. Admiral Horton, reviewing the operation's results from his headquarters at Western Approaches Command, recognized its broader implications. "We've learned that in modern warfare, the enemy's perception of reality can be as important as reality itself. If we can control what the enemy believes, we can influence their decisions and create opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise. That's a capability worth developing and refining." The development and refinement continued throughout the war and into the post-war era. Deception operations became standard components of military planning, with specialized units dedicated to creating and maintaining fictional forces, false intelligence, and coordinated campaigns designed to mislead enemy commanders. The principles established by Operation Ghost Convoy: understand enemy expectations, provide information that confirms those expectations, maintain consistency across all aspects of the deception, and exploit the resulting enemy actions, became foundational elements of deception doctrine. The human cost of the Ghost convoy operation was borne primarily by the German U-boat crews who died hunting a target that didn't exist. Approximately 450 submariners perished when 11 U-boats were sunk in March 1943, men who believed they were attacking a legitimate military target and instead found themselves trapped in a carefully prepared killing zone. Commander Wynne, who had conceived the operation, never fully reconciled himself to this aspect of its success. "We created a fiction that men died believing was real," he wrote in his private journal. "They were enemy combatants, and their deaths contributed to Allied victory, but there's something particularly cold-blooded about killing through deception. It's necessary in war, but it's not something to celebrate." The ethical dimensions of deception operations would be debated by military theorists and philosophers for decades. Was there a moral difference between killing enemy forces through superior firepower versus killing them through deception? Did the fact that the Ghost convoy saved Allied lives by allowing real convoys to pass safely justify the deaths of German submariners who were hunting a target that didn't exist? These questions had no easy answers, only the recognition that war created moral complexities that peacetime ethics struggled to address. Operation Ghost Convoy had been conceived, planned, and executed by people who believed they were doing what was necessary to win a war and save lives. The fact that it succeeded through deception rather than direct combat did not make it less legitimate as a military operation, but it did raise questions about the nature of warfare in an era where information and perception could be as important as weapons and tactics. The legacy of Operation Ghost Convoy extends beyond its immediate tactical and strategic impacts. The operation demonstrated principles that remain relevant in contemporary military operations: the value of intelligence superiority, the potential of deception to achieve disproportionate effects, the importance of understanding enemy decision-making processes, and the need for operational security when employing capabilities that provide significant advantages. Modern military forces continue to study the Ghost convoy operation for its insights into deception planning and execution. The coordination required to maintain a consistent fiction across multiple domains: radio communications, acoustic signatures, visual deception, and coordinated military operations, provides a model for contemporary information operations that seek to influence adversary perceptions and decisions. The operation also illustrated the vulnerability of military forces that rely on intelligence without adequate means of verifying its accuracy. German U-boat command accepted the existence of convoy X-229A because the intelligence matched their expectations and confirmed their existing assumptions. They lacked the means or the institutional skepticism to question whether what they were seeing might be deception rather than reality. This lesson: that intelligence must be continuously questioned and verified, that enemy deception is always possible, that assumptions must be challenged, remains relevant for contemporary military and intelligence organizations. The Ghost convoy succeeded because German naval intelligence failed to imagine that the Allies could create such a sophisticated deception. Modern intelligence organizations must avoid similar failures of imagination, recognizing that adversaries will attempt deception and that even convincing intelligence may be designed to mislead rather than inform. The North Atlantic in March 1943 witnessed something unprecedented in naval warfare: a battle fought against an enemy that didn't exist, where submarines hunted ships that were never there, where men died pursuing targets that existed only in radio transmissions and acoustic simulations. The Ghost convoy, that phantom formation of 87 merchant ships, achieved its purpose not through its existence, but through its absence. By drawing enemy forces away from real targets, by creating uncertainty that paralyzed enemy decision-making, by demonstrating that perception could be as powerful as reality in shaping the outcome of military operations. The U-boats that converged on the Ghost convoy's coordinates found only empty ocean and waiting destroyers. The merchant ships they expected to sink had never existed. The cargo they hoped to send to the bottom, tanks, aircraft, ammunition, had never been loaded. The great victory they anticipated had been transformed into a devastating defeat through deception so sophisticated that experienced commanders could not distinguish it from reality. In the end, the Ghost convoy's greatest achievement was not the 11 U-boats it destroyed or the 3 real convoys that passed safely while U-boats hunted phantoms, but the psychological transformation it created in the Battle of the Atlantic. German U-boat command would never again operate with the same confidence, never again trust intelligence without questioning whether they were being deceived, never again concentrate forces without fearing they might be walking into a trap. The Ghost convoy had succeeded not because it destroyed more submarines than any single engagement. Though 11 boats sunk was a significant toll, but because it fundamentally altered the calculus of submarine warfare in the Atlantic. Every subsequent convoy sighting would be evaluated with suspicion. Every concentration of U-boats would be questioned. Every tactical decision would be shadowed by the memory of March 1943, when experienced commanders had hunted a target that existed only in radio transmissions and their own expectations. Lieutenant Mitchell, reviewing the operation's results months later, recognized this broader impact. "We didn't just sink U-boats," she told a colleague. "We sank their confidence. We made them doubt their own intelligence, question their own procedures, second-guess their own commanders. That's worth more than a dozen submarines at the bottom of the Atlantic." The radio operators, who had maintained the Ghost convoy's communications, returned to their regular duties, carrying with them the knowledge that they had participated in something unprecedented. They had written fiction that men believed was real, maintained a deception so complete that experienced naval officers could not distinguish it from reality, and contributed to a victory that would be remembered as a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. But the cost of that victory, measured in the lives of German submariners who died hunting a convoy that didn't exist, remained a sobering reminder of warfare's moral complexities. The Ghost convoy had been a legitimate military operation, executed according to the laws of war, designed to achieve strategic objectives that would ultimately save Allied lives. Yet the men who died aboard U-517, U-402, U-123, and the other submarines sunk in March 1943 had been following orders, doing their duty, pursuing what they believed was a legitimate military target. Commander Wynne, in his private moments, never fully escaped this moral weight. "We created something that killed men through deception," he wrote in his journal. "It was necessary. It was effective. It contributed to winning the war. But I will never celebrate it. I will only acknowledge that in war, we do what must be done, and we live with the consequences." The technical legacy of Operation Ghost Convoy extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. The radio deception techniques developed for the operation became templates for future operations. The coordination between signals intelligence, operational planning, and tactical execution established patterns that would be refined and employed throughout the remainder of the war and into the post-war era. The hydrophone simulation technology, which had created convincing acoustic signatures of a large convoy, was adapted for other applications. Submarines began using similar techniques to deceive enemy sonar operators. Surface vessels employed acoustic decoys to confuse torpedo guidance systems. The principle that perception could be manipulated through careful control of sensory information became a foundational element of electronic warfare doctrine. The integration of ultra-intelligence with operational deception demonstrated the power of combining superior information with the ability to manipulate enemy perceptions. Knowing what the enemy believed and being able to reinforce those beliefs through carefully crafted deception created opportunities that neither intelligence nor deception alone could achieve. This synergy between intelligence and deception would become a hallmark of Allied operations for the remainder of the war. Operation Fortitude, the massive deception campaign that preceded the D-Day landings, employed many of the same principles on an even larger scale. Fictional armies were created through radio traffic and physical installations. German intelligence was fed information through controlled channels that reinforced the deception. The result was that German forces were positioned to defend against an invasion at Pas de Calais, while Allied forces landed at Normandy, achieving strategic surprise despite the enormous scale of the operation. But Operation Ghost Convoy remained unique in its focused intensity and its direct tactical impact. Unlike Fortitude, which was primarily strategic deception designed to influence enemy dispositions, the Ghost Convoy was an operational deception that directly engaged enemy forces, drawing them into a killing zone where they could be destroyed. The combination of deception and direct combat, the seamless integration of false information and real weapons, created a template for operations that blurred the boundaries between information warfare and kinetic warfare. The German perspective on the Ghost Convoy operation evolved over the post-war years as more information became available. Initial assessments, conducted immediately after the war, focused on the tactical failures, the intelligence mistakes, the operational errors, the technological limitations that had made German forces vulnerable to Allied deception. But deeper analyses, conducted by German naval officers and historians in the 1950s and 1960s, recognized that the Ghost Convoy represented something more fundamental than tactical failure. It demonstrated that Allied operational capabilities had reached a level of sophistication that German forces could not match. The ability to create and maintain such a complex deception, coordinate it across multiple domains, integrate it with real military operations, and execute it with sufficient precision to achieve decisive tactical results, required institutional capabilities that went beyond individual brilliance or tactical skill. Korvettenkapitän Schnee, who had survived the war and later wrote extensively about U-boat operations, reflected on the Ghost Convoy in his 1967 memoir. "We were fighting an enemy who understood warfare at a level we had not anticipated," he wrote. "They recognized that perception was as important as reality, that what we believed could be as influential as what actually existed. They created a convoy that existed only in our minds, and we committed our forces to attacking it as surely as if it had been real." That was not just tactical deception. It was operational art of the highest order. This recognition, that the Ghost Convoy represented not just clever tactics, but sophisticated operational thinking, influenced post-war German military doctrine. The Bundeswehr, established in the 1950s, incorporated lessons about the importance of questioning intelligence, verifying information through multiple sources, and maintaining operational flexibility in the face of potential deception. The Ghost Convoy became a case study in German military education, taught not as an example of failure, but as a demonstration of how operational innovation could overcome material disadvantages. The human stories behind Operation Ghost Convoy emerged gradually over the decades following the war. Captain Lieutenant M.U. Leller, one of the few U-boat commanders who survived the operation, struggled with survivor's guilt for years afterward. He had watched from a distance as British destroyers systematically destroyed submarines that had been hunting the same phantom convoy he had been pursuing. The randomness of survival. His submarine had been on the periphery of the patrol line, allowing him to escape when others could not, haunted him. "I survived because of luck, not skill," Müller told an interviewer in 1978. "My navigation was no better than Hartmann's aboard U-517. My tactical decisions were no sounder than von Forster's aboard U-402. I lived because I happened to be in the right place when the British attacked, and they died because they were in the wrong place. There's no honor in that, no pride. Only the weight of knowing that I survived while better men did not." The British destroyer crews who had executed the attacks carried their own burdens. Commander Pugsley, who had commanded HMS Hesperus during the operation, later wrote about the experience of hunting submarines that had been drawn into a trap through deception. "We were killing men who had been deceived," he wrote. They thought they were hunting a convoy, pursuing a legitimate military target. Instead, they were being hunted themselves, drawn into positions where we could destroy them. It was effective. It was necessary. But it was also profoundly unsettling. We had become executioners, killing men who didn't realize they were walking to their deaths. These moral complexities, rarely discussed during the war when victory was the paramount concern, became more prominent in the post-war years as veterans reflected on their experiences. The Ghost Convoy operation, precisely because it had been so successful and so one-sided, raised questions about the ethics of deception in warfare that had no easy answers. The strategic impact of Operation Ghost Convoy extended beyond the immediate tactical results and psychological effects. The operation demonstrated to Allied leadership that sophisticated deception could achieve strategic objectives at relatively low cost. Creating the Ghost Convoy had required significant planning and coordination, but the actual resources committed, radio operators, submarines for navigation updates, destroyers positioned to exploit the trap, were modest compared to the results achieved. This cost-effectiveness made deception operations increasingly attractive to Allied planners. Throughout 1943 and 1944, numerous smaller deception operations were conducted, each designed to mislead German forces about Allied intentions, capabilities, or dispositions. Some succeeded brilliantly. Others failed when German intelligence recognized the deception. But collectively, they created an environment of uncertainty that complicated German planning and forced the dispersal of resources to defend against threats that might or might not be real. The Ghost Convoy also influenced Allied strategy in the Pacific theater. American planners, studying the operation's success in the Atlantic, began developing similar deception operations against Japanese forces. While none achieved quite the same dramatic results as the Ghost Convoy, the principle of using deception to manipulate enemy perceptions and create tactical opportunities became a standard element of Pacific operations. Admiral Nimitz, briefed on the Ghost Convoy operation in mid-1943, immediately recognized its relevance to Pacific operations. "We're fighting an enemy who expects us to operate in certain ways," he told his staff. "If we can make them believe we're doing one thing while actually doing another, we create opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise." The British have shown us how effective this can be. We need to develop our own capabilities. This led to the establishment of specialized deception units within the Pacific Fleet, staffed by officers trained in the techniques that had made the Ghost Convoy successful. These units would play significant roles in operations throughout 1944 and 1945, creating fictional invasions, phantom fleets, and false intelligence that complicated Japanese planning and contributed to Allied tactical successes. The technological lessons from Operation Ghost Convoy influenced post-war naval development in unexpected ways. The hydrophone simulation technology, developed to create acoustic signatures of merchant ships, led to advances in underwater acoustics that would prove valuable during the Cold War. The ability to generate false acoustic signatures, or to mask real signatures, became an important element of submarine warfare as Soviet and American submarines played cat and mouse games beneath the world's oceans. The radio deception techniques, refined through the Ghost Convoy operation, evolved into sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities. By the 1950s, both NATO and Warsaw Pact forces possessed advanced systems for generating false radio traffic, jamming enemy communications, and manipulating electronic signatures to deceive enemy sensors. The Ghost Convoy's legacy lived on in these systems, though the technology had advanced far beyond what was available in 1943. The coordination between signals intelligence and operational planning, which had been crucial to the Ghost Convoy's success, became institutionalized in post-war military organizations. The recognition that knowing what the enemy believed was as important as knowing what the enemy was doing led to the establishment of specialized intelligence operations fusion centers, where intelligence analysts worked direct with operational planners to develop strategies that exploited enemy perceptions and beliefs. By the 1960s, Operation Ghost Convoy had become a standard case study in military education institutions around the world. The U.S. Naval War College taught it as an example of operational innovation. The British Royal Naval College used it to illustrate the integration of intelligence and operations. Soviet military academies studied it as a demonstration of capitalist deception techniques that socialist forces must be prepared to counter. Each institution drew different lessons from the operation, reflecting their own doctrinal priorities and strategic concerns. American military educators emphasized the importance of innovation and willingness to challenge conventional thinking. British instructors focused on the technical execution and coordination required for complex deception operations. Soviet analysts highlighted the operation as evidence of the importance of maintaining operational security and questioning intelligence that seemed too convenient. But all agreed on the operation's fundamental significance. It had demonstrated that, in modern warfare, the ability to manipulate enemy perceptions could be as valuable as superior weapons or greater numbers. The Ghost Convoy had not been won through technological superiority. German radar and hydrophone technology, while inferior to Allied systems in some respects, was adequate for detecting real convoys. It had been won through operational art, through understanding how the enemy thought and creating something that matched those expectations so perfectly that it could not be distinguished from reality. Commander Wynne retired from the Royal Navy in 1946, returning to civilian life with a chest full of medals and a mind full of memories he could not discuss. The Ghost Convoy operation remained classified for years, and even after details became public, Wynne rarely spoke about his role in its creation and execution. In his final years, living quietly in a cottage in Cornwall, Wynne occasionally received visits from military historians, researching the Battle of the Atlantic. He would answer their questions politely, but without enthusiasm, providing facts but little analysis, confirming details but offering no grand theories about the operation's significance. "You want me to tell you that I'm proud of what we did," he told one persistent historian in 1975. "That I believe the Ghost Convoy was a brilliant operation that demonstrated Allied superiority. But I can't give you that. What I can tell you is this: we did what we believed was necessary to win a war. We created something that killed men through deception. It worked. It contributed to victory. But I will go to my grave remembering the faces of those U-boat crews we pulled from the water after their submarines were sunk. They looked confused, betrayed, as if they couldn't understand what had happened. And I couldn't tell them. I couldn't explain that they had been hunting something that didn't exist, that they had died because we had deceived them so completely they never had a chance." Wynne died in 1978, taking to his grave the full weight of what Operation Ghost Convoy had achieved and what it had cost. His obituary in the Times mentioned his distinguished service during the war, but provided no details about specific operations. The Ghost Convoy remained a secret, shared with the few who had participated in its planning and execution, remembered by those who had survived its consequences. The final accounting of Operation Ghost Convoy's impact must consider both its immediate tactical results and its longer-term strategic and doctrinal influences. In the immediate term, the operation sank 11 U-boats, allowed 3 convoys to cross the Atlantic unmolested, and delivered critical supplies to Britain at a moment when those supplies were desperately needed. These tangible results justified the operation's execution and validated the risks involved. In the medium term, the operation created psychological and operational effects that extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. German U-boat command became more cautious, more skeptical of intelligence, less willing to concentrate forces for coordinated attacks. This caution reduced the effectiveness of U-boat operations throughout the remainder of 1943 and into 1944, contributing to the Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. In the long term, The operation established principles and techniques that would influence military operations for decades. The integration of signals intelligence with operational deception, the use of sophisticated radio and acoustic simulation to create false targets, the coordination of deception operations with real military forces, positioned to exploit enemy responses. All of these became standard elements of modern military operations, traceable directly to lessons learned from the Ghost Convoy. Perhaps most significantly, Operation Ghost Convoy demonstrated that operational innovation could achieve strategic effects disproportionate to the resources committed. The operation succeeded not because Allied forces possessed overwhelming superiority in technology or numbers, but because they possessed superior understanding of how the enemy thought and the creativity to exploit that understanding through deception. This lesson, that understanding and creativity could be as valuable as firepower and numbers, resonated through military thinking in the post-war era. It influenced the development of special operations forces, which emphasized unconventional approaches over conventional superiority. It shaped intelligence operations, which recognized that manipulating enemy perceptions could be as important as gathering information about enemy capabilities. It informed strategic planning, which increasingly incorporated deception and information operations as integral elements rather than peripheral activities. The Ghost Convoy that never existed achieved more than many real convoys that successfully crossed the Atlantic. It sank submarines, saved ships, delivered supplies, and changed the course of the Battle of the Atlantic. But more than these tangible achievements, it changed how military forces thought about warfare itself. The operation demonstrated that in modern warfare, perception and reality were not always distinct categories. What the enemy believed could be as important as what actually existed. Creating false perceptions could achieve real results. Deception, properly executed, could be as effective as direct combat. These insights, born from the desperate circumstances of 1943, when Britain's survival hung in the balance, would shape military thinking for generations. The Ghost Convoy's legacy lived on not in monuments or memorials, but in doctrine and techniques, in case studies and training exercises, in the minds of military planners who understood that the greatest victories sometimes came not from overwhelming force, but from making the enemy see what you wanted them to see. The North Atlantic in March 1943 witnessed something unprecedented, a battle fought against an enemy that didn't exist, where submarines died hunting ships that were never there, where victory came not from superior weapons, but from superior understanding of how the enemy thought and the creativity to exploit that understanding. The Ghost Convoy sailed only in radio transmissions and German expectations. But its impact was real, measured in submarines sunk, convoys saved, and a battle turned. That phantom formation of 87 merchant ships that never existed changed the course of the war and the future of warfare itself. In the end, the Ghost Convoy's greatest achievement was not what it destroyed, but what it created: a new understanding of how wars could be won, not just through superior force, but through superior thinking. That legacy, invisible but profound, remains its most enduring contribution to military history. The convoy that never existed had accomplished what many real convoys could not. It had changed the war, changed naval warfare, and changed how future generations would think about the relationship between deception and reality in military operations. And somewhere in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, the submarines that had hunted that phantom convoy rest on the ocean floor, monuments to the power of deception and the cost of believing what seems real but isn't. Their crews died pursuing a target that existed only in carefully crafted radio transmissions and their own expectations, victims not of superior firepower, but of superior operational art. That is the story of the Ghost Convoy. A convoy that never existed but changed everything.